On the video feed from Cheyenne, Wyoming, is Amy Edmonds with Wyoming Liberty Group, and she has been scouring the countryside looking for the best that public education has to offer, and found out that public education cannot offer the best. Am I right there, or am I just tossing something out once again, like with my big fat mouth? What do you think?
Way to start the show, Glenn. throw me a hand grenade.
Yeah.
You know, we all know that public education has real issues, and so you're not wrong. You're clearly not wrong.
Okay, I like it when now, let me tell you something I do before we get into the interview segment. Now and then, Amy, when I'm right about something, and she hates doing this, I bring in Donna, who's one of my business partners from the other office, a certified woman. And she stands in camera view and admits that I'm right, because no man is right until a woman confirms it. And so she's confirmed that I'm right about it. We can continue on with the show after that. So you, Amy, have just confirmed as a official woman, certified as such, that I was right about something, and I do appreciate that. So what have you been working on lately? By the way, I just interviewed one of our candidates for superintendent of public instruction, Mike, I can't pronounce his last name.
Sabias.
Yes, that's him. Yeah. I was curious of your opinion of him. You've had a chance to meet him.
You know, since I don't vote in that primary party election, I have to tell you, Glenn, I haven't spent a whole lot of time looking into Mike yet. I've been busily worried about the other primary election candidates, so I can't be very enlightening on Mike.
Okay, all right. Well, then let's talk about what you've been working on lately and where you've been.
The first thing that I thought we would talk about was last week the State Board of Education did vote to stop work on the science standards, meaning that they are not going to bring forward the next generation science standards. And essentially they talked about the budget footnote that was passed this early spring prohibiting them from doing so. Okay,
now they're not going to bring forward the next generation science standards. And let's, for everybody out there who don't understand why, specifically, why did Wyoming think that those science standards were bad?
Well, because they are bad.
Okay.
Yeah, they're bad standards.
But no,
they have real issues in them.
Exactly, do you think?
Say that again, Glenn.
Exactly what reason? What did Wyoming have as a problem with those standards?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, the standards have very weak math to science correlations, particularly at the high grades. Some of that has to do with math that's being taught, but essentially it leaves out chemistry, some pretty important high-grade, science classes that students would be taking if they were going to go into STEM careers. So very weak correlation. These standards were given a C by the Fordham Institute, and there was a lot of discussion by the reviewers, one of which is a scientist out of Massachusetts who reviewed the standards and just really had problems with that part of it. There's also a real issue with the way they handle man-made global warming. And I think parents were deeply troubled, and as well were policymakers, with the way that they handled that in the science standards. They essentially advanced that as a fact, and really not the way I think folks who want to handle that in the science standards.
Okay, but now let's talk for a moment here when we're talking standards and who sets the standard, because this is something that's been confusing to me and of great concern. If they turn and say, let's say Wyoming scored out of 10, Wyoming scores, or let's say out of 50 states, Wyoming ranks number 48. Well, according to whose standards and who's doing the assessments to figure out where we stand, and why aren't those standards our own? Because we are the people in Wyoming. I'm really confused as to who these experts are supposed to be, and should we be listening to them?
That is a really great point. We spend a lot of time talking about what other people say about standards and how they rank them. The Fordham Institute is really the ones who rank standards, or they're about the only nonprofit think tank in the country that rates standards. But I would agree with you. I think you have to go beyond the letter grade that they give. I mean, remember, the Fordham Institute is a huge advocate for the Common Core standards. So you have to go beyond the letter grade and look at the rubric behind it and look at what they consider good standards to be and how they grade standards first and decide, does that fit with what we're looking for in standards? Is this methodology really the way we want to look at standards, and do we accept that grade as a grade that we think works? I think that's a legitimate question and one that should be asked. I would agree with you. I think the people we should be talking to in Wyoming is the people of Wyoming, parents, the consumers of the education system. If we want to go out and have college and career ready standards, we should be talking to people at our colleges and our university. So that's who should be deciding. That's who should be ranking. It's frustrating to me when I read in the newspaper quotes from State Board of Education members. I mean, for instance, one of them, Pete Gosar, who's on the Wyoming State Board of Education, saying that he's really offended that the legislature came in and stopped them from adopting standards that they've been working on for a year and a half. Well, here's my problem with that, Glenn. The Wyoming Department of Education and their review team, which didn't include parents, didn't go out and talk to folks, spent a year and a half to approve a set of canned standards and did not make a single change to those standards. They met 3 times. Does that sound like a process that works?
No, I mean, it really doesn't. Well, now, here's the next problem, and this is when I was interviewing, again, a candidate today for Wyoming Superintendent of Public Instruction. Still too long of a name. Like School Marm, I'm just sticking with that. We talked about some of these standards and teaching to the test, but then there comes the next problem, Amy, because on the one hand, we have to test our kids to find out where they are, but then how do you test the kids without putting teachers in a position where they have to teach to the test?
That's a great question. It's part of the, we've been on this road of accountability, standards, then testing, and then somehow we're going to get accountability since 2002, and it hasn't worked. So here we are. You're correct. No Child Left Behind requires that we do a state assessment. We have a federally mandated state assessment we have to do. But I think it's time that people in Wyoming began to realize that this whole federal involvement and federal, new federal ideas is something we need to reject. We need to come up with a system that works in our state. We've spent the last 2 decades implementing federal education policy and calling it Wyoming policy. That's just not acceptable.
Okay, because I have, in talking again with several candidates for the superintendent job, and many of them have talked about cherry picking different parts. In other words, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There may be, they say, some good things in Common Core. There may be some good things in No Child Left Behind. So don't throw the whole thing out just because it came from the feds. I mean, would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree with the robust discussion and taking a look at the standards. When there's levels of definition when we talk about the Common Core. We're talking about the Common Core as a set of standards, but we're also talking about the Common Core as the manifestation of this idea that this country is going to have a national set of standards. That we should reject 100%. No part of it should we be involved in. There should be no national standard. There should be no national test. That completely erodes the most fundamental part of education, the sovereignty of local communities to decide how they're going to educate their kids. So, Glenn, on one hand, I would say no part of that. There's no cherry-picking good stuff out of that idea. On the other hand, when we say, well, let's look at these standards, maybe there's something good in them. I think there's a lot of bad in them. I think the whole pedagogy, the way they push down these standards are not good. Now, there may be educators who want to say there's something good in them, but we should have that discussion in Wyoming, and there should be no hook by the federal government making us want to implement parts of it so that we can, get money or get their approval.
Okay. Well, and let me ask you about the money aspect. I know I'm really strained for what you originally said you wanted to talk about here, but let me ask you about the money aspect. And by the way, for those listening on radio, I'm talking with Amy Edmonds from Wyoming Liberty Group about education in Wyoming. So from time to time, I come across somebody, we've just spoken together at some of those meetings, who would just like to see federal money completely out of Wyoming altogether and we just educate our kids with Wyoming money. Sounds like a good idea. Do we have the money in Wyoming to do that?
Well, of course. I mean, if the will of the people is this, then yes, the state will come up with the money. I think we have an obsession over money in education, when really what we need is a commitment to agreeing to what is quality education. I don't think we have a funding problem, Glenn. I don't think we have a lack of money problem. I think we have a lack of understanding the process and also valuing the sovereignty of our local communities.
Would you say that? And I just took recently a trip to see a fellow by the name of Andy Johnson, which lives all the way down in the southwestern corner of the state. I mean, he's way out there. And I passed several small schoolhouses, the kind where it's a tiny little building and they built an apartment for the teachers to live right next door to the schoolhouse. Wow, that is because my graduating class in Fort Myers, Florida had 5,000 kids. Now that's a town in Wyoming. So I would say that the way we have to teach our kids in this area is completely unique to Wyoming. And the federal government has no idea what's going on out here and what our kids' needs are.
That's very true. And it's also true, I mean, you've given a great example to talk about why decentralizing and really building schools a local thing. Even at the state level, we build schools with this, sort of state, heavy hand of the state on it. And there are areas in Wyoming that are very different from other areas in Wyoming. So here in Laramie County, the way we build schools is completely different from a rural county where you would see that school building with the apartment next to it. So, ultimately we have to have a value and we have to value local communities educating their children and building their buildings. We have to value that as the most important thing.
Okay. Now, I know, again, I've strayed way off of the topic for you, but what right now in Wyoming education has mainly been on your radar screen?
Well, obviously, we've been watching closely the science standards. We're glad to see that the state board has decided to just back down and wait. We expect to see a tremendous amount of rhetoric from people like the climate parents and the others continuing to do their thing and talk about how we're all a bunch of square earthers. So
well, we're anti-science. We rejected science, is what they said.
Right, exactly. And we expect to see that. We know that's going to happen, but we look forward to and hope that we will see a robust conversation, not just about these standards or other science standards. I mean, another quote in the paper from and I hate to pick on Pete Gosar, but he just had such interesting quotes in the paper where he's talking that these science standards are the best standards in the country, and now we're limiting ourselves. First of all, the next generation science standards are not the best standards in the country. There are much more excellent standards that we can look at. So we're looking forward to a robust discussion, not only of looking at better standards, but the process of how we adopt standards. We keep saying, Glenn, I say this every time I'm on the program, I'm like a broken record, but the way we adopt standards doesn't work. It's broken.
Or, by the way, the women in the office want to warn you that you've now 5 times in 20 minutes said that a man was right, specifically me, and they're getting a little concerned about that. So you might want to hold off or tell me that I'm wrong about something just to kind of placate them.
All right.
Okay.
I'm prepared.
So,
I'm prepared.
How do we find the proper standards for the state of Wyoming? Where are we looking for them, and by what standards do we pick our standards?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we get the right people involved in creating excellent standards. When we go look, and we here at the Wyoming Liberty Group have spent some time looking around at other states who've created really exceptional standards. And so much of it, Glenn, is about the process. It's about how you get people together to create those standards. It's not so much, I think Wyoming has been in a very bad habit of just going out and picking a set of canned standards and saying, yep, that's it. Where states that really excel are states that recognize who needs to be involved, who needs to be there creating these standards. We need to have parents there. We need to have, you have people touting that the Common Core are college and career ready standards, but we don't go out and talk to our colleges or the University of Wyoming and talk to the people who teach math, freshman math, and who teach freshman literature. They're the folks who can give us an idea of what children need to know by the time they're finished with high school so that they are college ready.